Bootcamp. My name is Luc Vermaas, and together with Gert Zweedijk, we ensure that you stay informed of the latest developments in the field of business analysis. We combine different theoretical approaches with our extensive practical experience from the field so that you immediately leave our sessions with tangible tips and ideas to put in practice in your daily work. Have fun watching, and if you want to stay informed in our latest videos, follow us on YouTube. Good morning, everybody. Welcome again to our 8th episode of the BABOK Untangled series. So we're nearing the end, Gert.
Mm-hmm.
So but luckily that is definitely not the end, right? So we have enough topics that we will continue with after this Untangled series. So we already have a bunch of creative and inspiring ideas that we would like to take further after we finish the BABOK Untangled series. But today we're going to focus on episode 8, which is basically the last almost last episode of the BABOK Untangled series. So there's one episode to come, which is the competencies, which we talked a lot about theory and tasks, but then again, one very important aspect of a business analyst is the competencies. How do you actually engage with stakeholders? How do you listen well enough that you understand the requirements that are coming out of them and to be able to ask questions? So all of that competencies will be discussed in the final episode of the BABOK Untangled series. Just to give you a bit of an overview where we are. So we have solution evaluation today, and then the underlying competencies is our last episode. So solution evaluation, I think, and again, I don't know how you think about that, Gert, but it's one of those topics that often is skipped because we basically we put a lot of effort in gathering requirements, designing the solution, and then it becomes operational. But how often do we actually look back to see whether is this solution actually meeting the criteria? At least in a lot of scenarios where project I've been part of, this step is often skipped, and then we're already on to the next project. So curious what your experiences with this step.
Yeah, I think when you develop some kind of solution, there always will be some evaluation of that solution. So think about reviews you have. You may have sprint reviews to show a new project you just built, but it all depends on your definition of done. So how far are you going into the testing of things? That depends from situation to situation. So my experience, yes, I do this when we have a sprint review. We have stakeholders who are involved and may say if the solution is okay or not, and that leads to new requirements, and you can of course put them again on a backlog to keep on developing the solution. So this happens all the time. So that would be the prototype version of the slide we see in a minute. So so we come back to this later.
No, that's actually a good point. So where I think Agile is really how to say that, putting the evaluation, or at least always have these intermediate moments where you measure and track whether this is in line with the expectations.
Exactly.
So I think that's already like ingrained into the whole way of Agile working, which indeed is a good thing. So what is solution evaluation? Well, according to the BABOK, solution evaluation basically describes all the tasks that need to be performed to assess the value delivered by a solution. And this could also be like, okay, are there any internal barriers? Are there any constraints that prevent us from realizing the full potential of this solution, which is not always or only the technique or the technology. It could also be the company, the people. So it's also important to look at those factors. So basically the tasks that you have as part of this knowledge area is, okay, first of all, how are we actually measuring our solution performance? What key performance indicators can we apply to measure it accurately? How do we then analyze that? How do we, we probably get data, but where does it come from? How do we actually get to that data to get to measure these KPIs and understand whether we do well or not? Then, of course, we need to assess the limitations, because sometimes it's also when you measure, you could find while analyzing, you can find a challenge or limitation that needs to be resolved. So you need to assess that. How do you do that? So it's basically about the solution itself. But then again, as mentioned, also the enterprise, so the company, the internal people, the processes. Are there any limitations seen there? And then as a logical final step, what would be the recommended actions to increase the solution value? So those topics will be discussed today. I think a very interesting session again, where we actually have a use case that which will be discussed later on. So, or it's kind of a casus case that we want to
Mm,
use to explain how this knowledge area works in practice.
mm.
But before we
Uh,
go in there,
yeah,
maybe Gert, you can talk a bit
yeah,
about in the practice of it.
yeah. On the left side, you see a picture we've shown you before. It's about projects. It's about the strategy analysis, knowledge area, the requirement analysis and design definition that are as part of the project itself. Solution evaluation in a more kind of waterfall-esque kind of working will be at the end of the project. So strategy analysis is all about pre-project things like uh, what's the problem, what do we need as a company, what is the product or the solution, why is it needed. In the requirement analysis and design definition, you start to elicit and model document the requirements to make sure you can build the solution or have it built. This is at the end of your project. You start evaluating your solution. It's typical things like testing what you do, like acceptance tests. Think about those things. Deployment and how does it work in practice? So in production, I need to say. So how does the solution provide the value you thought it would provide? Okay, so that's what solution evaluation is all about. On the right side, you can you go back to the, okay, on the right side, you see the agile environment. So here you have the three planning horizons, the strategy, initiative, and delivery. So initiative typically would be your project level thing. So delivery is all about delivery of your solution. And as you can see, you have short feedback loops. So you build, and you show what you've built, and you get feedback information from stakeholders. So you learn as you go. And as we told you before, these feedback loops can also be done uh, between the different levels. So delivery may actually lead to feedback information you can use at an initiative level. And at an initiative level, you may have feedback information that you can use at a strategy level. So solution evaluation is typically done, well, all the time, you could say. So you think about what to do at strategy level. You start an initiative. Let's say that's a program or a project. And at this project level, you will have to deliver a solution. And you start evaluating the solution iteratively. So that's the main difference between the more waterfall-esque kind of projects and the more agile kind of working. Yeah, we have in this knowledge area, we have a sequence of tasks. So in the last session where we were talking about requirement lifecycle management, you could say that there is no actual starting point for a task within the knowledge area. Within this knowledge area, there is some kind of order sequence. So you start with 8.1. then you continue to 8.2, then you have 8.3 and 8.4 you could do at the same time. And in the end, you come up with a recommendation. So that's what this slide tells us. And of course, we will have input and we will have output like all the other knowledge areas. So we're going to zoom in to that a little later. This is I think this is a very important slide because it says, okay, solutions may be in varying stages of development. So for many people think, okay, well, a solution is something that is operational. Yeah, that could be the case. It could be some kind of uh, piece of software system that's into production and you're going to check whether that's okay or not, whether it needs improvement. So that would be the third bullet here, the operational releases. These are full versions of a completed solution. But also a solution could be some kind of prototype. Like I said before, that would be if you're in a project and you build a bespoke IT system, you would say, well, you could consider that as a prototype, and you're going to check whether that prototype is okay or not to decide whether you want to go on with the same, well, things you've been doing before, or you need to quit because it doesn't add value at all. And then there's the second bullet. These are typically pilot projects, and these are typical, well, situations that you could use, for instance, some kind of package solution. So that would be the buy solution. The first one is the make solution. The second one would be the buy solution of some kind of, well, package you can buy on the marketplace. Think about SAP or Salesforce. These are typical packages organizations buy, and they use pilot projects to find out whether the solution fits the organization or not. So that's also what we are looking for today. So it's about operational systems. It's about systems that are being built, bespoke systems, and it's about deciding whether some kind of package is the right package for your organization or not. So very important to well express this particular um, yeah, development stages.
Yeah, it was actually a nice bridge to the case study where I think one of the we also listen to the feedback from our listeners, and then of course one of the things is that could you make it even more tangible, more practical, which kind of we come up with a case study to help you scenario-wise go through the different tasks as part of this knowledge area. And I think this is a very, very interesting one because I have a background in airline companies, so therefore also maybe for the people that are aware of what's going on nowadays with air travel, there's a lot of challenges with staff shortages, a lot of flights being cancelled. But also they just came out of the Corona crisis where they also had their challenges. So the airline industry at the moment is being disrupted, and they have a lot of complaints that are being thrown at them. So if you look at like a scenario where on average you could get about 2,000 claims a day, working with a permanent staff of 100 people, making that handling 20 claims per day, which allows them to respond within 48 hours, and they measure a CSAT of 4.8, which is pretty well done. I think in line with expectations from customers. But due to the heavy increase of volume, due to all the challenges they're now facing, all of a sudden there was a whole new situation, and instead of 2,000 claims, they receive even 4,000 claims a day. But again, they have the same amount of people, maybe even worse. People are leaving because they see better job opportunities elsewhere. So airlines are really struggling to keep up the customer satisfaction scores and also the KPIs in terms of average response times, because they're going up and the season is going down. So somehow the airline companies have to do something. So this airline company came up and decided to implement a chatbot solution to help reduce the pressure of their service agents. So this is something they already, so in this case, they already use Salesforce, which is a CRM platform, capable of handling communications with your customers. And they added so already doing their service, customer service management on that platform. And that comes also with a chatbot solution. So after, if you go back into chapter 7, which is all about coming up with these a solution, which one to choose, something we have discussed in previous episodes. How do you actually come to that decision, make, buy, and what are we going to do? So in this case, they chose to use an out-of-the-box product from Salesforce itself to configure it and try to support customers as quickly as possible to reduce the workload of service agents. So that's the scenario we will discuss as part of, okay, now we have implemented this, we want to actually evaluate this solution going forward. So this case study will be used to, whenever we finish with a task, we will try and group it back into, okay, but how is that then part of this case study? So it's a new angle we're trying to add into our sessions to make it a bit more practical and scenario based. So going into task number 1, give it back to you, Gert.
Yeah. The first one, measure solution performance. So what you see here is that you have input, of course. You have input and implemented solution. So yeah, I was talking about this earlier. That could be a prototype, a pilot, or some kind of operational solution. It could be external. So it doesn't necessarily need to be external. We have business objectives. So that was an output of the strategy analysis knowledge area. And we have validated requirements. So as part of output of the last knowledge area requirement lifecycle management, you can use this as a guideline to make sure you come up with the right performance measures. So define, well, yeah. These measures may depend on the solution, of course, and the context, and on how the organization defines value. So it's very well, it's contextual. So it depends on what you need to measure, of course. We're going to see an example in a minute for the case study of Luc. Actually, what you need to do is, if you want to make sure you have the right solution, you need to have smart objectives to check whether the solution is the right solution. So that's what you do here. You think about the right measurements to choose to be able to do a good analysis of your solution. And you have different kinds, of course. You may have KPIs for that, enterprise measurements, all kinds of goals and objectives. So could be anything. So let's zoom into the example.
Yeah, so basically, if you look at metrics and key performance indicators, like Gert was saying, it's all about the context. So here's just a long list of typical, service environment metrics, right? Which if we would be handling a sales case, then you would have different metrics again. Or so therefore, it's always good to make sure that you put your measures into the context of the solution. So if we then go into the case we just mentioned before that, maybe it's good to highlight, okay, how do we actually get to that information? I mean, there are various techniques to, in the end, decide on these performance measures. Always during our sessions, we try to work with a couple of examples, and one of those examples could be a focus group, and make sure that you interact with the right people, maybe with customers, with your key stakeholders to decide, okay, how do we define the value that this solution is bringing. You don't have to come up with that with yourself, but maybe become a moderator and share your objective and then see how people respond to it. And that's typically the way how you could go about. So let's imagine we did a focus group with for our case study, where we want to say, okay, how do we actually measure the solution performance of our chat solution? So going into that case studies, so basically it all starts with first you define, right? So what are the measures? So in this case, we have come up with the following measures that we think the chatbot can influence, therefore could interpret it as whether it's good or bad in terms of if this going up or down. So basically, we have quantitative measures and qualitative measures. So in this case, quantitative measure, volume. So we are going to check whether the volume handled by service agents is actually going down because of the chat bot is taking over cases, where overall volume will not change, right? The chatbot will not influence the fact that less complaints will come in. No, it's more about how can we make sure that these claims are then handled not by actually people, but maybe chatbots, which ultimately reduces the workload of the agent, and in this case should have a positive impact on the average response time. And we would also expect that a chatbot, would be capable of handling what we call first call resolution. So making sure that whenever a claim comes in, immediately are able to answer to that claim, and therefore we don't have back and forward communication going on, which often takes the most time. And so the first time right approach is basically what we're trying to measure here. Then on the qualitative side, we have, of course, our customers. Are they happy? Are they perceiving the value as well from interacting with the chatbot, which we will measure through CSAT. And so again, from that whole list of metrics you could define, we have chosen a few which we think can impact, or at least we can use to measure the value of this solution. Well, how can we validate that? Well, of course, we need to see a few of our stakeholders, which in this case, the head of service, who is actually also interested to see if actual costs will go down for claims handling, which is a separate angle you can look at it from. And the manager service is interested to see if the customer satisfaction will remain, because every stakeholder might have a different, I would say, KPI or measure that he or she thinks this will be successful, yes or no. But again, you need to start somewhere. And I would always say start simple and then work your way towards the more complex KPIs. And then, of course, last but not least, but very important, you can set all the measures you want, but if you're not able to actually collect the data to ultimately receive any of that data, then that's important to think about. So for instance, talk about volume. Do we actually know how many claims come in a day? Well, we do track that, so yes, we know that. Do you actually track the average response time? Do you already track CSAT? And where does that data is coming from, and how can you compare that with the data you're getting from the quantitative measures? So it's all about having these various data sets, but are you able to get that into one data set to analyze, which is the next step, to analyze and actually get the right results from and get the right conclusions from to take next steps. And in this case, we will have customer survey responses, and that will give us information on the customer satisfaction. So we have seen that the Salesforce system is capable of getting all the quantitative measures, and we have a specific customer survey response that will tell us the CSAT, and then we need to analyze both in the next task, which is analyze performance measures.
Yeah, this is second step. As you can see, as an input, you can use the solution performance measures. You use potential value, and you see on the left side the solution scope. So what you're going to do here is you're going to analyze well your solution according to the set performance measures. So the solution performance is being checked versus the desired value you have defined earlier. That is what also important here is that you check whether there may be risks involved. So what risks may be there introducing your performance measures. So your performance measures may uncover new risks, for instance. What trends are there? So trends, is there any noticeable increase of errors at certain moments in time? So these are typical the trends you can start analyzing. In what way are the data reproducible or repeatable? So that would be the accuracy element in this. Are there any variances in your performance? So these are all things you're going to investigate as a BA to check whether your solution, well, is doing great or not so great. Yeah, you can use the evaluation criteria to compare different solutions to each other. So what you could do is you could start analyzing different solutions. So you may have some kind of package. You may have maybe implemented your own bespoke system, and you can use evaluation criteria to compare these different solutions implementations with each other to come up with a proper solution value ranking you see on the right side. So actually this technique is in the BABOK guide described as acceptance criteria and evaluation criteria. Well, we've been looking at the acceptance criteria earlier, and you use the acceptance criteria typically to check whether one solution fits your criteria or not. Your evaluation criteria you can use to compare different solutions to each other. And you can start thinking about value attributes, as you can see, like costs, performances, usability, and functionality. These are just 4 mentioned here. So you can start comparing the different solution with each other. So it's all about making sure you define the proper criteria so you can start measuring and can start analyzing them, comparing them to each other. You can say something about this one, Luc. So data
Yes,
mining
I
is
think this
another
is
technique.
it's a hot topic at the moment. I see a lot of especially technology players alike here in the example. Salonis is very top of mind for a lot of people. If you talk about data mining, I already discussed it during task number 1. In the end, it's about, are you able to get the right data to measure the performance? And because in the end, measuring would mean, okay, we can analyze it, which means we can get conclusions, therefore able to improve our solution. Therefore, you see that process mining, which is a very, I would say, a typical, thing or terminology, which is used to get process information from various sources to kind of track where, for instance, in the process, if you typically have, for instance, in a sales example, where do people drop off? Which stage do they typically drop off, and why would be the reason? It's because we didn't do certain steps. So it's all about, really digitizing your processes allows you also to then, with data capture, see where flaws or mistakes, errors might happen. So this is also a technique you could use to measure performance. If we then bring that to the case again, where basically what we call solution performance versus desired value. So when we did our analysis, the chatbot allows the company to do 5% of the queries, where it was anticipated it could do 10%. So the 4,000, we would anticipate 400 of those could be done by the chatbot, but now it's perceived to be 200. So there's a bit of a mismatch in terms of the performance versus what we desired. So that is something after analyzing comes out, and something we need to work with. Also, in terms of risks, right, we saw that during the pilot, actually the customer satisfaction was going down, which is not a good thing, right? So that's a risk, because that means that our customers are now perceiving our customer service less valuable than they thought even before we might have, where we were actually able to not answer as quick as possible, but still the answer that we gave was satisfactory, therefore had a bigger satisfaction than we had today. So apparently the chatbot isn't doing that what the customer is expecting. Also, in terms of trends, what we have done is we measured during the entire pilot time, which was about 3 months, and we also automated our reporting. Therefore, in terms of consistency and also the second point, accuracy, we did try to really get an objective view over time, so weekly reports over time in 3 months' time, to give us trends where we indeed saw that the customer satisfaction trend-wise was going down a little bit. At the same time, average response time was going up slightly. So the one measure perceived, performing better, but the other not. So again, then it's a trade-off. So you want to improve both. So how can we then move forward now? So basically what we need to do is that one analysis showed, when we went a layer deeper, so not just total volume overall, but actually looking at the type of claims where the satisfaction was lower, then we realized, okay, there's a specific claim type which we happen to have a lot, which are delayed and canceled flights. That means that a chatbot was not really able to satisfy the answer to the customer, which resulted in even more claims, because then I wanted to speak to an agent. So that performance variance, in this case of the chatbot, came at the surface while we analyzed a layer deeper. So not at the total volume level, but really about different claims that are coming in. And so it's really all about, again, coming back, data. Are you able to analyze this? Well, luckily enough, because they are using the Salesforce platform, they are able to analyze that data very quickly, real time, over time, with trend monitoring. And that was basically giving us the data we needed to then go into the next step, is kind of, okay, what are actually then these limitations, and can we overcome them? But that will be handled in the next chapter.
Yeah, the next one. The next one uses the solution performance analysis output as an input. So as I said before, there is a sequence in this knowledge area. Again, you use the implemented solution and the performance analysis measures to find out whether there are any limitations of the solution itself. So to find out what the actual limitations of your solution are, you do this task. There are some elements to it. So you need to make sure that there are any solution component dependencies. So limitations could typically uh, 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 be some kind of dependency between the components of that solution. You can also investigate the solution problems. So as a BA, you would typically find out what the source of the problems could be, or sources could be. You could find out when the solution is not working at the required level of performance. So typically, these are the things you can do as a BA. You can, of course, also assess the impact of your solution to your organization. So we're going to see that in a bit. The orange frame you can see, that's the reason, because I want to express here the need for solution limitations as an input for your analyzed current state. So your analyze current state could use the solution limitation as an input. And this, well, shows us that there is no certain starting point. A couple of months ago, we started with the strategy analysis knowledge area. And that was all about, well, checking out what is going on in the organization. And here you can see, well, this is the last knowledge area we do. And here you see the output of this knowledge area we do in the end. Leads to information you may use with the knowledge area where we started with. So this is like a cycle. You have. What does it mean? It means that you may start your business change initiative with some kind of assessment of your current solution. So that's what typically happens. So you have some kind of current state, and your current solution is part of that current state. So then you start first checking whether what are you doing well, what are you doing not so well, to find out what to do as a business change initiative. Up to you, Luc. This one.
Yeah, I think one of the things to kind of see whether as a technique is benchmarking, to compare organizational practices against best in class practices, which often typically you could see from analyst sources or these large consultancy firms like PwC or Forbes or Gartner that are basically looking at the market all day long, interviewing, but also doing a lot of research, surveys to actually understand where are you in a scale of, which you can then hold your own company against to see if you're actually in a good space, yes or no, or whether you probably need to put more investment in. And so then benchmarking is actually an interesting tool to use for for assessing whether is it indeed is it purely a limitation of your own or is it a limitation of the industry. So it's really helping you to get that granular level of okay, where do we need to put our effort in. Also market analysis, researching customers and the market to see whether your products and services are actually fitting the needs. So in this case, a very well-known analysis is, which is more like what we call external analysis, is the D-step. I think there are many variants of this analysis.
The pestle analysis
but
is
basically
the other
the most
word.
important thing is that it's used for external environmental factors, which are listed in demographic. So what about the population composition, density, geographical characteristics? What about the infrastructure? So all of that, like, does that influence actually the things you're doing today? What about economic? So what are some of the market characteristics? What is the financial and the economic climate at the moment? Are you operating in a growth market, or what are if you look at today's world, I think economically we're not in a good shape, right? So you could really then try and see, okay, if this is happening, how can we then work with that factor that often is not so easy to influence or not to influence at all. So therefore you do need to work with it, and you have to probably adjust your internal strategy, internal actions, objectives to kind of overcome the challenges you have externally, like social, cultural, technological, ecological, political, all factors that are difficult to influence, but they do exist, and you do need to be aware of them to kind of define your strategy, how to work with that current state. Bring that to our case study. So all about the 3 steps that you need to perform as part of the assess enterprise limitations is about, okay, and identify internal solution component dependencies. So what are the dependencies you have right now internally? Well, one of the dependencies realized is that as we went for a out of the box tool which in this case it's Salesforce. It's an existing platform. It's one of the best platforms out there. But then again, you're using an external tool which does have limitations, right? It's not, you didn't build it completely yourself. So first of all, it helped you go to market quicker. Second challenge now is, okay, but how do we then change it into something that really works for our use cases, for our markets, for our customers? And therefore, there was actually a limitation there identifying right now. So then investigating actually the solution problems, like already expressed when we did the analysis. During the analysis, it became clear that some type of claims were not suited for a chatbot. So then in this case, the limitation is that, okay, we are not able to fully operationalize a service center through a chatbot, which I think everybody would understand that's never possible. But then again, what can you do to then, you know, to get to that point where you're happy with the solution? Again, the measures we talked about in step number one. And at the same time, you're not, continuously running into limitations. So now then basically, if you then know all of that, so you know what the dependencies are, you know what the current solution problems are, and then you can actually create an impact assessment. And then when we realized after that assessment is that the chatbot was actually, because we had an automatic trigger in there to pay out amounts for compensation. And then we realized when adding financial data, all of a sudden the costs were going up significantly. And that was because the chatbot was just paying out, probably almost every claim that came in without any supervision, any approval rule in place, which therefore the costs were rising instead of going down. And if you remember, one of the stakeholders was the head of service that were actually looking at the costs. It was not a direct measure we applied in the first place, right? Because it was all about volume, satisfaction, and average response times. But then again, if that costs you a lot of money, then there's always a trade-off to be made there. So how can you leverage a good cost level, but still having good response times and volume handling and a good customer satisfaction? It's always in balance, right? Cannot be the one only supersedes the other. So therefore, as an action from this impact assessment, we realized, okay, we need to probably change some things to get to the results we want to be, which is going then into a bit of the rest of the, which is more the enterprise limitations.
Yeah. Besides the solution limitations, you may also have enterprise limitations. So this typically your organization that is lacking something that's going, that's happening, things or things not happening. Here you have input the current state description, you have your performance measures, you have your solution, and you can start assessing the limitations of the enterprise itself. So that may be your organization, or that may be a set of organizations that are involved. And these are your enterprise limitations. And again, the enterprise limitation can be a good starting point for your analyzing your current state. So that's where we started off. Typical elements are your enterprise culture assessment. So things like, do people resist to change? How do they think about this new solution to work with? The second one, the stakeholder impact analysis, is typical about how does the solution impact a certain stakeholder group within your enterprise. Things you need to analyze, of course. What about organizational structure changes? Maybe that's one thing that is needed in your organization. What about changes in policies or procedures, skills, new roles required? These are typical your operational assessment things you need to consider. So yeah, factors that limit your value realization are typically things like culture, deep-rooted beliefs, values, and norms. There's things people won't tell you, but things that are there within every organization. Operations, think about skills, capabilities, and procedures, but also technical components, stakeholder interests, and reporting structures. So you can use the organization charts for this to find out what the reporting structures are in your organization. This is a slide to let you know that yes, there is some kind of sequence within this knowledge area considering all these tasks, but 8.3 and 8.4 can be done at the same time and will be done at the same time. So they will be concurrently done at the same time, of course. And both are needed to come up with a proper recommendation for increase of solution value. SWOT analysis, good technique. Showed you this before. That's a mnemonic for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so all these combinations are shown here. SO strategy. So that's where you use your strengths to, to exploit the opportunities that the organization faces. You may have ST strategies to, to use the strength to ward off potential threats. So you have 4 combinations. And what this has to do with your your organization or your enterprise limitations or your strengths. You could use your strengths to make a solution even more valuable. And if you have weaknesses, well, you can use the SWOT analysis to find out what strategies you have to choose. And the next slide, that's the scope of fight. I don't know if this is an international term, but we use it in Holland a lot, scope of fight. This is typically a good mnemonic to think of either strengths or weaknesses within your organization. So if it's all about strengths and weaknesses, think about, are we good at security? Are we good at communication or not? What about our organization structure? Things like personnel, finance, etc. So this is an extra on top of the SWOT technique you can use to find out where your strengths lay in your organization enterprise and where your weakness is. It is more about the limitations. So I think this is more about the weaknesses you have as an organization to figure out what to do about them.
Exactly. I think if you combine everything we just discussed, so basically the SWOT is more of like a model where you combine the information you get from the D step, also called external analysis, which is all about opportunities and threats. I mean, they are opportunities or they are a threat for your company, which again, you cannot really influence a lot, but doing a proper internal analysis, which is more around this scope of fight, where you can then have these strengths and weaknesses, hold those against your opportunities and threats, and therefore the SWOT is kind of where it all comes together, and you try to find strategies that could be combined in terms of your unique selling points, your unique market proposition, go to market, and so that really helps you with all of that information to define your SWOT analysis. Yeah. Bring that back into the practice, into the case study. So again, looking at the different types of enterprise limitations. So we looked at the product solution limitation, which was all about, okay, well, it's a product we bought out of the shelf, but it had some limitation in terms of further development. So how can we overcome that? That's scenario 1. Scenario 2 is about the enterprise limitations, where if we're actually looking at some of the cultural aspects, it seemed that a lot of people were not actually really happy with chatbots in general, right? They have experiences themselves being very negative. It doesn't help you. I always need to talk to an agent anyway, but then I get stuck. I need to pick up the phone. And so there was some reluctance about on chatbots, which also doesn't really help them to find investment for improvement. So therefore, you first need to tackle and understand what are the cultural barriers, so that you can also tailor your improvement plan to overcome those. So then if you do a stakeholder impact analysis, the chatbot allows the company to do 5% of the queries where we anticipate 10. The costs were going up, as we saw in the analysis. The average response time was going down, but at the same time, volume remained the same. So therefore, and CSAT was going down. So then all of a sudden, there's only one measure performing better than it was before, but the other ones are going down. Knowing that the head of service and the service department were really looking at costs and customer satisfaction, and not so much at the average response time. So therefore, actually, both stakeholders were not really happy with the results. Then the organizational structure changes, so questions that arise. Oh, but will then the chatbot ultimately replace the agents? Will the organizational structure of the service department change based on this new technology? Which are fair questions to ask, right? Because yeah, it's kind of replacing machines for humans. So those are a few, structure changes that you might need to take into account for your assessment as well. And then indeed, the operational assessments, then you're actually going to combine all of that information into a document combined with the solution limitations. So basically, performing both tasks have helped us with, okay, we have now solution limitation, we have enterprise limitations. So now let's see how we can go into the next task and actually recommend actions to increase the solution value.
Yeah, thank you. The last one for this knowledge area is recommend actions to increase solution value. So here we're going to use the limitations to come up with actions, recommended actions. Yeah, this is all about understanding the factors that create differences between the potential value and the actual value. Yeah, here, orange frame around is the managed stakeholder collaboration. So this part of the elicitation and collaboration knowledge area. And I want to express this because recommended actions are itself don't add value. You need the recommended actions to collaborate with your stakeholders. So you have your stakeholders and you want to do it together with your stakeholders to come up with the recommended actions. You don't do the things yourself. So I state that again here. Work together with your stakeholders as much as possible. And especially the recommended actions, of course, if there are changes needed within your organization, that of course you need to do that together with your stakeholders. Yeah, so what kind of examples can you think of? You can do nothing, so you can just leave it as it is. So that's always an option to leave it as it is. Another one is an organizational change. Think about uh, uh, automating processes. That would be an example of an organizational change, or a better access to information. You can also reduce the complexity of interfaces. So when interfaces are too complex, of course, then this is a very good recommendation to choose. If there are two ways of working in an organization where there only one needed, well, then you have the fourth one to eliminate your redundancy. avoid waste. That's a lean thing. So lean thinking is all about avoiding waste. Think about waiting times or stocks and motion within your organization. These are all kinds of wastes. Identify additional capabilities. Think about new skill sets or even new job titles. And you could also think about retiring the solution. So that could be another recommendation, to retire the solution. I don't know, Luke, if we have time for the additional factors here, or we
No,
need
let's
to
jump
move on.
in.
Yeah, I think so. The risk analysis and management. So a good technique, I think, to identify areas of uncertainty that could negatively affect the value. Yeah, what's important about risk analysis is that you first start by identifying the risks, and that you then analyze the risk, thinking about the probability of each risk and the impact the risk may have on your organization. So, and of course, you need ways to manage your risk as well. So what are you going to do once they are actual issues in your organization? What are you going to do about it? That's the technique, risk analysis and management.
Yeah, so bringing that back into our case study. So basically where we have two steps. One is we have to probably adjust solution performance measures, as we were seeing throughout the case. After the analysis and the impact assessment, we saw that actually looking only at volume and customer satisfaction was not what ultimately the company was aiming for. So we added an additional KPI, which is basically support cost versus revenue, right? So this is also a typical measure. So how much does the support cost you versus the revenue you obtain? So that is something we, based on the recommendations, say, okay, we need to probably look at that measure, but then what would be the recommendation as part of the solution? So as a solution, we were able to build a chatbot that now automatically assigns a claim to an agent for review if an amount exceeds 250 to do an additional check. And also the chatbot pushes the claim towards an agent if it's not a standard claim for a delayed or flight or missing baggage claim, because we typically saw that handling those claims was heavily impacting customer satisfaction. Therefore, we now build in automatic workflow rules that then allow us to send certain claims to people, certain claims to chatbots, and then if there's a certain threshold, a chatbot will then be overruled by a service agent. So therefore, really finding that digital versus human touch approach, which in this case allows still a good customer satisfaction, keeps cost levels as where they're supposed to be, but at the same time does increase the average handling time. So all in all, by continuously looking at these factors and going through this, so like Gert was saying in the very beginning, solution performance measure is not something you just do one time. It's a continuous activity that you should do and continue to measure and improve while you're doing this. So hopefully this case study brought a bit of a different angle to the normal sessions we do, make it a bit more practical, put them really into a scenario-based thinking, because yeah, we're already at the end of the show again, where we have touched about the different factors that we have measured the solution performance, we have analyzed, we have assessed limitations, both from a solution point of view, from an enterprise point of view, and we have recommended actions to help increase the value of the solution. And not only in terms of money, but also in terms of stakeholder satisfaction, customer satisfaction, and all the different angles you can look at it from this point of view. So I want to thank you again very much for listening in, for the people here real time with us, but also the people who are listening in to us later online. So yeah, happy to see you again on our next call, which is all about the competencies, different than we have done before with the knowledge areas, all about people characteristics, traits, behavior, So it's going to be a very different show, but I think a very interesting one. Gert, any
Thank you
last
for
words from your
listening.
side?
Thank you for attending.